Hello and welcome to our latest edition of CharitEpulse, our bi-monthly charity podcast. My name is Catherine Rastomji. I head the charities practice at Shakespeare Martineau, and I'm joined today by my regular co-hosts Charles Mosquita at Cultivating and James Saunders, charity partner at Moore Kingston Smith. And today we have our very first and very welcome guest host on the session today. So today we're joined by Emily Collinson, who is Assistant Finance Business Partner at Joseph Rowntree Foundation. But Emily, I'll let you translate what that actually means and what you actually do.
Yes, thank you. Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here. So I work at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and my role sort of touches a bit on all of the different teams. So I get a good insight into what's going on across the board. We're a charity whose mission is aligned with solving UK poverty. So we've got our headquarters in York and then offices in London, Scotland, and now Northern Ireland. And this is the sort of first and only charity I've ever worked at. I came straight out of university. I did an undergraduate in maths and a postgraduate in finance. And I've really loved working here so far. It's sort of everything I thought it would be and more. I've had lots of opportunities to meet with other people in the charity sector. And that was sort of what motivated me to ask my question via email about a healthy and productive working culture within charities. So I don't know, James, if you would like to sort of go first with your experience, but what do you think contributes to creating and sustaining a positive and effective environment in the charitable sector?
I think it's a really interesting subject matter that you raised around the working culture within charities. And when we have talked on this podcast previously, particularly about the culture around boards and managing charities, but not necessarily about working in charities, perhaps because actually the three of us haven't worked in charities. We work with charities a lot and we see people working in charities. I think there's definitely a different focus for charity employees by and large, and it might well be their original drive, if you like, what brought them into it in the first place. And again, you've given your example, Emily. But are they driven by an overriding sense of, I want to work in a sector, work for organisations that nominally do good, as opposed to just the more commercial element? I would always say, from my side personally, working with charities, and I accept this as an accountant rather than as an employee, working with charities and schools and public sector bodies has kept me in accountancy far longer than I would have done if I'd have been working in the commercial world. And a lot of that is to do with the culture.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think staff are often more sort of driven by the goals of a charity. It feels a lot more personal and like there can be a lot more passion. I'm not saying that there can't be passion for sort of organisations that aren't a charity, but I definitely think it's one of those things when people talk about working at a charity, they often mention, the mission and what it means to them. I don't know if you find that charities have a more collaborative approach rather than a competitive approach. I don't know, Catherine, if you have sort of experienced that.
Yeah, and I wonder, Charles, thinking of you in relation to bowel cancer research and other charities where you're a trustee, on that piece of, is it collaborative, is it competitive, is it something else in the charity sector? How would you describe that?
I think it very much depends on what you're doing. So I think if it's fundraising, I think it becomes quite competitive for the very definition. I think on other areas, I think there is much more of a collaboration, and I would like to see a lot more going on that basis. I think what's quite interesting is with the pandemic. So we talk about culture of this I suppose the balance, which I don't think we've necessarily found. I don't think this is exclusive to the world of charities, because I think actually this is across the workplace. But I think this whole thing about working remotely and being in offices in person, working with people, is creating an interesting dynamic. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I do wonder whether as trustees we need to start thinking more around how that affects culture. And I don't know, with Emily, from your experience, and I don't know when you started work, but you will have been through this process. You will no doubt have some views on that particular subject.
Yes, well, I am a sort of in the office every day type of person. I started at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation after the pandemic, and I've been told by loads of people how different it was before. It was always really busy, you'd need to book a desk, and now you would have no problem finding a seat. I feel like it's a very individual thing. So for me, I like to come in, see people, find it easier to talk and ask questions. But in terms of having a good work-life balance, some people, for example, if they have children, they might work from home more, or they might have more flexible hours. And I think that sort of adds to having a healthy working environment and working culture, as everyone sort of respects what each of us need as individuals.
And it's really interesting, I think, I think some of your comments that you had mentioned, Emily, were about this piece around culture, and also, how employees are treated when employed by charities, so the staff benefit piece. And I think what I reflected on there was, years ago, I would often be saying to clients, it's good that you look after your staff, but your employees are not your beneficiaries. And I think
Yes.
previously there was too much of an emphasis on, that benefit had gone over the top. Whereas now I think possibly we've gone too far the other way. And Charles and I were at an event where there were some examples being given by charity chief executives of, you can't invest in staff. The guilt they feel about, do you provide sandwiches for a lunchtime meeting? Do you provide food at trustee meetings? And, all of that in terms of how do you, get that balance between people are giving up their time and effort, but it shouldn't be they're doing that because they're receiving a benefit from it. But I think you had raised a bit of a comment around that in terms of staff benefits.
Yeah, well, I think staff benefits is always under a lot of scrutiny, no matter what sector you're in. But in the charity sector, it can be very different, because people often feel as though it's charitable money and you should be as efficient and effective as possible with choosing your staff benefits. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what you think, if staff benefits should reflect the charity's values, or whether
Charles,
that's
what do
not.
you? Yeah. I think Charles is itching on this
Oh,
point.
Well,
sorry.
I'm going to answer. No, that's fine. I'm going to answer a slightly different question, and we'll come back to that if I may. Just because NCVO has just produced a report, The Road Ahead 2025, and I have to say, being very sad, I have read the report. And on page 19, it talks about the shifting dynamics of the workplace. And just to steal from them is the World Economic Forum revealed that by 2030, over 20% of jobs worldwide are expected to evolve significantly due to labor market disruptions. And this also goes on to the around AI, but the likelihood is that there are going to be about 170 million new jobs created, and around 92 jobs misplaced. But the other thing that they then go on to talk about is there is a massive difficulty in the sector around recruitment. So trying to find people, which is partly pay. I suspect this leads on to your benefits as well, because I think we need to look at that as a whole. And so if the sector's finding it's harder to recruit the right skills, we need to be challenging why. And again, going back what Catherine was saying, the lunch, we had Professor Peter Frumpkin, who is the academic director at the Gradle Institute at New College. And one of the issues he brought out was about we're not paying people properly, and therefore we're not able to attract the right people into the sector. And I think that's becoming an increasing problem. And so I think that this is all interlinked into it. And if we don't address it now, this problem's just going to get bigger and bigger.
And James, is this something you see in terms of your audit work and I suppose different practices in charities, whether they have a sensitivity around staff benefits or kind of, how they're seen to be utilising the charities' funds?
I think there is often a lot of hand wringing about expenditure that is seen to be in any way luxury or beneficial. Yeah, I do. I think. I mean, I see it in, for example, the academies sector, where they are very hot on regularity because they've got to abide by parliamentary regulations, and they are not allowed to have anything involving buying alcohol, for example, at all in an academy because it's seen as against the parliamentary rules, or any sort of gifts or hospitality. It's really, really, really strict because it's that regularity and propriety stuff. So different pockets of the charity sector will, I think, as Charles was saying earlier, will have different applications of that public benefit test. And it is a public benefit test. That's really what we're talking about here. As we've said on many occasions about many different topics, it's the man on the Clapham omnibus or the Daily Mail reader, or however you want to term them, the perception from the public and from the other parties, and more, as we've seen from the press in these areas and the media, and with some MPs tagging on as well, justifying their opinions. It's the perception of the staff benefits, I think, that is a real question here.
Oh, am I allowed to come in? This makes me it makes my blood boil, I'm afraid, because I just think we need to push back on this and we need to change the narrative. And again, I think Professor Peter Frumkin pointed this out. He said we all focus on the sort of the cost of running an organization and being very frugal and everything else. And we're not spending enough time actually looking at the impact. And the thing is that these organizations don't function if you don't have a good staff there. And if you don't look after, which I think comes back to Emily's point, is if we don't look after our staff, then actually our organizations are going to wither. And so when the man on the omnibus challenges that, they're not going to, I mean, best one in the world, they can't afford to work for free. And therefore, if we want good people, we need to pay them properly. And I think
getting back, Emily's point was more about the staff benefits reflecting charity values. And I think, Emily, you gave the example of, for example, a mental health charity offering free counselling for staff and anti-poverty organisation providing, a sufficient sustenance for staff to make sure they're okay. And I think I don't think it is common practice. And I think that was one of your questions was, do you find it's common? I don't think it is. And I think part of the reason is, as I explained, because no charity wants to be seen to be giving an extra benefit beyond the normal, or actually even the minimum, frankly, in case they are accused of feathering their own nest, extra benefits for staff. And I think that goes back to my very first point. There is that hanging there about this sort of thing.
Yeah. And as Catherine mentioned, your staff aren't necessarily the sort of target audience of your charity. They might not be the ones who are needing those benefits.
No.
But on the other hand, charities are moving more towards mission alignment across the board with all the things they do. And, it's interesting to see at what point, you draw the line. Should your benefits for your staff also be mission aligned if you're aligning everything across the board?
I'm afraid I take a slightly different view, in the respect that the charity sector, by its very definition, is all about helping people. I mean, it can be whether it's the planet, whether it's nature, whatever it may be. But we should, the core values that we have as organisations should be very similar across all the organisations. So I think it's not necessarily more mission related. It's much more about the values that are fundamental to every single organisation. And therefore, if you don't treat your staff based on those values, you're actually not living the ethos of the organization. So to me, there are fun. I mean, you talked about sort of lunches and giving people access to counselling and stuff like that. I mean, we've talked in previous podcasts about burnout and mental health issues within the sector, which is not just for the sector. Actually, this is in a wider community, particularly following the pandemic. We need, as trustees, as senior management executive, to respond to that, and we need to make sure that we look after our staff. And so I don't think this is necessarily specific to the mission related. I think this is much more about culture within organizations.
And I think that's what sets us apart, doesn't it? I think that's the culture and ethos, or should be, of the charity sector. But I think when we focus too much on the bottom line, and I think this came out of the lunch that Charles was referencing, the focus point should be on how can a charity be as effective as possible. And so you look after the staff and you say, we appreciate all your efforts, and you're important to us, you're an asset, therefore we care for that asset, rather than saying, it's a good thing that everybody is, exhausted and, living on the absolute minimum. I think that's the wrong emphasis, but I think we probably need to get more on the front foot about how that's explained and how charities are proud of what they do and how they organise themselves.
Can I give you a really good example? I happened to be traveling down from Leeds the other day, and I was going down to London on the train, and I was traveling in first class. And the reason I'm traveling in first class is because it's the only place where I can actually work. I can get my laptop out and do anything else. Opposite me happened to be a civil servant. I'm not quite sure how we got into, who worked in the Ministry of Transport. Anyway, she was apologizing that she was traveling in first class, but she'd got a special deal. And I just turned around to her and said, why are you apologizing to me? This is just completely and utterly the wrong mindset. The fact is that you are, during office times, you are sitting there working, and this is a conducive environment to do it. Where if you're sitting in standard class, that is not so easy. And so therefore, we've just got to change the narrative, and we shouldn't have to feel that we've got to justify something. But there are times where I think we can be much more robust in how we respond to people's perceptions. But it also means that civil servants, government also needs to do exactly the same thing. I mean, you did not join a charity to make a fortune. Because if you wanted to make a fortune, you would have probably gone off and been an entrepreneur and developed your own business and everything else. It's a very different environment. But it doesn't mean that senior management and trustees should not be looking after staff and being giving people the right benefits, which is both salary and what comes with that.
I thought it was very interesting on one of your recent, it might have even been the last episode, like when you were talking about sort of staff feeling valued, and just the act of saying thank you and acknowledging, someone's done a good job because they don't always know it. I feel like that really resonated with me, because where I work, it's like that all the time. There are so many, thank yous going round and well dones, and that looks really good. Do you think that that sort of positive culture comes about because of working in a charity and it being a more collaborative environment, or is it more competitive sort of elsewhere? I feel like there's often external collaboration and external competition, but internally, do you find the same, or do you find it to be different?
Your question, Emily, that you originally put to us, I think was about a productive and healthy environment.
Yeah.
Working environment, which I think you picked two words there that are very important, but it's quite rare to find them together successfully.
Yes.
Quite often, organizations, and this is charity or non-charity, corporate, commercial, anything, they can be productive, but quite often they might not be very healthy.
Mm-hmm.
They can be very, very healthy, but possibly not overly productive. And you've actually picked two words, I think, that could be put at two ends of a scale. Finding the happy medium is difficult. And I would say the key to it is all the way through the spine of any organization, from the top to everyone in between and everyone throughout. You've got to have the right investment in what you're doing, whatever organisation that is. And I say the word investment because I think you've got to get people invested in the project, whatever that is, whatever type of work you're doing. That to me, somehow you've got to get people invested in the long-term success of your project. Let's just say project, because that's rather than say charity or, business or whatever. Everyone's got to be like-minded, and you've got to have continuity, you've got to have longevity. But the real key is somehow to get people invested, and that will differ from organisation to organisation. But it's a common problem, I think, for most organisations at the moment. They're struggling to really get people to be productive because they're not genuinely invested in the organisation that they're working. I think it's a big problem with the current generations.
I think that is a really excellent point. You need people to be invested. And, at charities, often people are quite invested because it can be quite personal, and you can see the impact sort of right in front of you.
Yeah, I think there are two things here, aren't there? Is that from a leadership point of view, whether you're trustees or you're the chief executive or deputy chief executive, taking time to what I would call walk the floor, go and see people, go and have a chat. This doesn't, and it has to be genuine. It can't be something but just taking an interest in. So I think that's the first thing. And that does come back to your bit about, when you see people doing, and I can tell you, I spend my life saying to people, they're doing a fantastic job, mainly because they're doing things that I certainly can't do, and are not capable of doing. But also I think that people working for, need to be realistic about people's leadership ability, because you very rarely will you come across somebody who is the perfect person to lead an organization. We all have strengths and weaknesses. And I think we just need to recognize that and not expect that the people leading, because I think it's very easy to blame them for a culture that is wrong. I think they're very much so responsible for that, but we all have a responsible for making that culture work and doing it. And also, shouting out and when things you see that are wrong. So again, that should be actively encouraged. And it's having this ability to say something, but doing it in a safe environment where you have no fear of what you're saying is then going to be taken in the wrong way, so long as what you're saying is genuinely meant.
Well, I think that is going to be an excellent point to end on, I think, Charles, in that call to arms to be fearless and to make changes in organisations. Emily, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated having your feedback on the previous podcast that you'd listened to, and also having your views on the session today has been really interesting. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Charles and James, as usual. Thank you to our listeners. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and on our own websites. We'd love to have any further feedback. So if Emily has inspired you, dive in and let us know what you think. And do feel free to share with colleagues and family and friends as you wish. And we look forward to having you at a future session. Thank you.